So, Dr. Nass, you have expertise in biowarfare and bioweapons. Based on the evidence you have reviewed, can you prove the WHO is preparing a global takeover?
Yes, definitely.
Whoa.
Tedros and the WHO are not honest brokers. So, unfortunately, they have lied repeatedly about what is actually in the documents. So, he says several times that there will be no taking over of national sovereignty. And in the latest version, the way the WHO explains that is they say nation states will still be able to pass health legislation and enforce it. And so therefore they're still sovereign. But let's think about it. So in Vichy France, the Vichy government was able to pass legislation and enforce it. But if it didn't satisfy their German masters, right, the legislation would be gone, and so would the legislators. So for the WHO to say, your nation can be our Vichy France while we are your Nazi leaders giving you your binding orders of what you have to carry out, how sovereign is Vichy France?
If the Treaty on Pandemics was adopted, to whom would we actually be giving the power?
85%, the WHO gets 85% of its funding from private sources. Only 15% comes from dues from the member states. And of the 85%, most of it, about 75% of it, is earmarked, which means that the donor specifies how the money is to be spent. So basically, the WHO was taken over long ago by its donors, and it has been an organization that primarily has to please its donors.
In this case, big money.
Yes, so
the vaccine manufacturers.
And the vaccine manufacturers are all donors, but Bill Gates became the largest funder of the WHO. Bill Gates, as the basically founder of Gavi, and CEPI, and giving money also through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And interestingly, Bill Gates and other charities go back and forth. So he'll give money to Rotary, or he'll give money to UNICEF. Then UNICEF and Rotary will give money to WHO. So one hand washes the other. So if your nation signs on to the treaty or the international health regulations, you may be signing a blank check for the WHO to do whatever it wants in the future.
That's why in front of the European Parliament you talked about a coup?
Yes, correct. That's exactly why. And this coup can only proceed if the public is in the dark. This is a list of some of the worst things. Here is a list that I compiled of probably the worst things that are in the treaty and these proposed amendments. That, first of all, that everything the WHO says will be enforceable. Both documents are binding. They have never been binding before.
Well, the WHO says there won't be any enforcement. That's not correct?
No, that's not correct. Why would they have a compliance committee if they didn't want to enforce it? What they've said so far is that the nations will have to enforce it themselves.
So the nations would have to enforce it
on their people.
On the people, but then if a country doesn't comply, would there be fines or...
So this is another thing. You're signing a treaty that says we haven't specified what these provisions will be, but you will have to live with them later.
So a blank check.
A blank check. The WHO wants to be able to tell you what drugs you can have during a pandemic and what drugs you can't have. So that's, very worrying when we were restricted from using ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, and nobody even told the people to use vitamin D, which was very useful. There is also surveillance, so nations are required to perform this illegal activity of surveilling the social media, your electronic footprint, and restricting what you can say, what you can share and spread if it doesn't go along with the WHO narrative. the pandemic treaty will always be in force. You don't need a declaration of a pandemic. So the WHO can do what it wants all the time. So that gives great latitude to the Director General. There will be much less oversight of the drugs and vaccines that we will be offered during medical emergencies. Now, normally it always takes 10 to 15 years to develop a vaccine. And so this is crazy. You can't possibly develop a vaccine in 100 days and test it in humans and find out if it's safe or what the side effects are. It's impossible.
So the type of vaccines we've experienced during COVID would be the new norm.
Even worse, those vaccines took over 300 days to be developed. We're talking 100 days. And of course, the only way you can make that work is if you take away liability from the manufacturer. So there will be no liability. And nations are supposed to manage liability, but the manufacturers will be free of liability.
Yeah, so the population is actually paying itself for the injuries.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So the population is the guinea pig, pays for the vaccine, pays for the injuries with their taxes.
Convenient.
It's a very good business model.
Absolutely.
No wonder so many companies have gone into the vaccine countermeasures business.
Maybe not very ethical though, but...
Well, but it's legal.
Oh, then we're good.
Well, yes, the treaty requires that nations create a legal milieu to allow all this to happen. And the final thing I want to say is One Health. One Health is a bogus concept that says the health of humans can't really be considered effectively unless you consider the health of animals, plants, and ecosystems. Many billions of dollars have been spent to push out this concept.
What would be the consequences?
Well, what I believe it is an attempt to do is to place all these other things like climate change, environmental destruction, biodiversity loss, and animals and plants into a basket that the WHO is now in charge of. And they can then manage issues that relate to biodiversity loss or climate change under the rubric of health, and in that way gain massive control over the planet. If someone else can give me a logical reason why climate change has been rolled into pandemics, for instance, and I can show you that the idea that pandemics are caused by climate change has been pushed out all over the world to the rich, the poor, major media, scientists, and we're all supposed to believe that now.
Yeah, two issues in one.
The one.
More power.
One world, one health, one governance. And the WHO's documents, the EU's documents, the World Bank, they all call for global governance. Global health governance, global finance governance, global economic governance.
Is there a way we can oppose the new treaty?
No mainstream media have covered this issue. So almost nobody, unless they're an activist, knows what's going on. So it's important to educate yourself about what are the facts and then talk to people you know. Now, I founded an organization just 5 months ago called Door to Freedom. Our website is doortofreedom.org, and we have posted all versions of the treaty and the amendments, and we have handouts. And now the handouts are being translated into about a dozen languages.
But do you think people could weigh on their governments?
Yes. First of all, you have to train the people in government. So 2 weeks ago, we went to Congress, and we gave a seminar for 3 hours to members of Congress and their staff, because they didn't know what's going on. Nobody knows because the media has not covered it. So first you have to educate your lawmakers. Then there are a few funny ways that this can be fought on a legal basis. In the original treaty, it's required that any new amendments have to be shared with the member states 4 months in advance. But it's been announced that they don't think they'll have their work done and they don't plan to share them 4 months in advance. And since they don't plan to do that, this is a legal area that your nation or your lawyers can challenge them on.
Yeah, and the
Maybe
final
fewer.
vote is planned for May 24th,
Yes.
I think.
But I call it the Hotel California Treaty because it's very easy to get in, but if you want to get out, it takes 3 years. So I think that the globalists who are pushing this from the background are intending that most of the changes they're trying to make in the society and most of the ways they need to use the WHO to do this will be accomplished within 3 years.